On the surface, Hollywood looks like a dazzling dreamland where with a bit of luck, anyone can become rich, famous, and make it. Someone who certainly had luck on their side when they entered Hollywood was Laura Prepon. Laura moved to Hollywood in 1998 for her first ever television role, playing the quintessential girl next door Donna Piccioti on That 70s Show. But while That 70s Show made Laura Prepon rich and famous beyond her dreams, it also introduced her to someone who brought a lot of darkness into her life. Danny Masterson. Laura and Masterson's relationship was much deeper than most of her co-stars. Through their friendship, Masterson introduced Prepon to the three biggest relationships of her life. He set her up with his brother Chris Masterson, who has his own alleged dark history, and when things didn't work out with Chris, Masterson was also the one to introduce Laura to her ex-husband and father of her children, Ben Foster. Masterson is of course also responsible for introducing Laura to the controversial Church of Scientology. Laura was a very active member of the alleged cult for decades, but when Danny Masterson was arrested for horrendous crimes, within weeks Laura claimed she was no longer an active Scientologist. Following the arrest and trial, Laura refused to speak about her and her husband's still close ties to Masterson, her exit from Scientology, or her alleged intimidation of Masterson's victims just prior to the victims going to the police. Given Laura's silence on the subject, some people thought that she was distancing herself from Masterson, while others came to the conclusion that she was continuing her close friendship, but just not publicly. After Masterson's sentencing in September 2023, conversations around Laura Prepon and Danny Masterson's relationship died down, but behind the scenes, Laura's relationship with Masterson was allegedly causing issues in her marriage, but not for the reasons you might think, as her now ex-husband Ben Foster has also been friends with Masterson for decades. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Laura Prepon, her ties to Scientology, her relationships, and what really happened behind the scenes. We'll also be going over her very messy divorce, how her earnings have taken a major hit due to her co-star's crimes, and the shocking accusations made about Laura herself. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in to the hidden, controversial, and potentially cruel world of America's ultimate girl next door, Laura Prepon. Laura Prepon was born on March 7th, 1980 in Watchung, New Jersey. She was the youngest of 5 children, and she was raised in a household that blended Catholic and Jewish traditions. Her father, Michael Prepon, was actually an orthopedic surgeon, and her mother was a high school teacher that was also a gourmet home chef. Tragically, Laura's father passed away when she was only 13 years old when he had to have open heart surgery. Laura was encouraged by her sister at the age of 15 to go into modeling, as her sister was working at Glamour magazine at the time. She submitted casual photos from her family vacations, like cruises, to a modeling agency in New York, and she said that the modeling agency said to her that they would sign her, but they told her that she needed to lose 25 pounds first. And she said she was really taken aback by this because she was always really tall and fit, and she played a lot of sports, and she said that this just really got to her because it was the first time that there was really like a lot of attention and comment on her body. She did end up losing the weight, and at 15 she signed to a modeling agency, and she ended up dropping out of high school and moving to Milan to model. She lived there for a couple of years and also modeled in Paris and Brazil. She shared an apartment with a lot of other models from the same agency, but she didn't like living with other women, and so she got her mother to pay for an apartment for her to live by herself for the 2 years that she was in Milan. Laura has talked about this time period a little bit on her YouTube channel, about how she slept with the lights on because she was scared of the cockroaches in her apartment, and in regards to her YouTube channel, we'll definitely talk about that later, as I have a lot to say about that. After 2 years, she moved back to New Jersey to the small town that she was from, Watchung, and she and her mother decided that she was going to try to get into acting because when she was in Italy, she had booked her first ever bit of acting work, and she was actually in an Uncle Ben's commercial. And this was back when national commercials were paid pretty well. So seeing the money and moving back to New Jersey in the mid-90s, she was like, acting seems to be the best avenue to go down finance-wise. So in the mid-90s, around 96, she started getting into acting. She said that her and her mother just opened up the yellow pages and blindly picked an acting school, and she ended up going to Caroline Thomas's Total Theatre Lab in New York City. She started appearing in a few plays during this time, 1996, like Ascension Day, and in 97, she had her first acting role outside of commercial work, and she was cast in an internet soap opera that was put together by Levi Strauss, which is the Levi jeans company that you probably think of when you hear Levi, and that ended up going up on the internet. In 1998, she entered TV pilot season with a very short resume, but that didn't really matter because she ended up getting her big break that season when she was cast in a new Fox show, Feeling Alright. When auditioning, the show went through a bunch of titles, mainly Teenage Wasteland and The Kids Are Alright, but due to the fact that these were song titles by The Who, there was a lot of like complicated legal issues, so they decided to change the name of the show. After they shot and tested the pilot, people kept forgetting that the name of the show was Feeling Alright, so they decided to just go with the name that people kept referring to it whenever they were testing it. People kept saying, oh, I like That 70s Show. So that's what they went with. Laura was only 18 when she was cast on That 70s Show and was completely unknown, which was the case with the vast majority of her co-stars, young and completely unknown. The show starred Laura Prepon as Donna Piccioti, Mila Kunis as Jackie Burkhart, Topher Grace as Eric Foreman, Ashton Kutcher as Michael Kelso, Danny Masterson as Stephen Hyde, and Wilmer Valderrama as Fez, which stood for Foreign Exchange Student, and his real name and home country was never disclosed in the show. All of the series regulars stayed throughout all 8 seasons of the show, except for Topher Grace and Ashton Kutcher. They both departed the show at the end of the 7th season, although they did appear in a few episodes as special guest stars in the 8th and final season. As I said, Laura was only 18, so was Valderrama. Topher and Ashton Kutcher were 20, Masterson was 22, and Mila Kunis was only 15. As most people probably know, this is a famous thing that's known about the show now. Mila Kunis was 15 when she was on the show. She was only 14 when she was cast, and she ended up lying whenever they asked her how old she was. She said she was going to be 18 on her birthday, but just didn't say which birthday, but they still ended up keeping her when they found out she was only 15. And That 70s Show went on to be a massive hit for Fox. In fact, That 70s Show was the only show that survived pilot season, that 1998 to 99 TV season for Fox. While the show was airing, a lot of the behind-the-scenes drama on That 70s Show stayed under wraps. If this show was airing today, the cast, mainly Kutcher, Masterson, and Valderrama, definitely wouldn't get away with a tenth of the stuff that they got up to in the late 90s and early 2000s, but that was a world without social media, cell phones that didn't have cameras or the ability to record video, and they also didn't have fast, high-speed internet. They could pretty much do what they wanted, and it's very well known today that the set of That 70s Show was a very toxic place, and due to a lot of the stuff coming out over the years, the cast and their reputations have been very mired in controversy, scandals, criminal behavior, assaults, lies, cheating, and darkness. And I've covered a lot of that in my That 70s Show video and my individual videos about the cast members. That 70s Show ran for over 200 episodes and was Fox's second longest live action sitcom ever, just behind Married with Children, though it didn't quite have the same rating success. And in the later seasons of the show, the ratings did seriously start to take a bit of a nosedive. The premiere of the first season in 1998, however, had a viewership close to 12 million. And even then, those were really good numbers. But I mean, now those would be pretty much unheard of because we really just don't get viewership like that anymore, but we really don't get shows like this that have these big episode seasons of 24 episodes. And I have talked about this a lot on the channel, but that is why when you look at the most popular streaming shows today, they are all of these older shows like Grey's Anatomy and Friends and The Office, because we just don't have that quantity anymore of these shows that run for seasons and seasons and so many episodes. I mean, a lot of shows now are 8 to 12 episodes, and it's not uncommon to have 2 years between seasons. That does all tie into the residuals for actors and things, and we will get more into that when I discuss what came out in Laura Prepon's divorce proceedings and her income that is primarily coming a lot from the That 70s Show residuals. The cast of That 70s Show, with the exception of Danny Masterson, were very unknown, and due to Masterson being a bit more experienced and also a few years older than everyone else, he became the leader of the younger cast. And many people connected to the show and who were around the cast at this time said that Danny Masterson was a little bit of a cult leader on set, and I can't imagine where he'd picked those skills up. While Masterson, Kutcher, and Valderrama spent a lot of time together on set and off set, frequently partying and going out, Masterson also became very close to Laura Prepon. Masterson is actually responsible for Laura's 2 longest and most serious romantic relationships in her life, as she did end up dating Danny Masterson's brother Chris Masterson, who went on 2 years after That 70s Show came out to be in his own Fox TV show, Malcolm in the Middle. And Chris Masterson himself has quite the reputation as well, with a lot of people in the industry having issues with him too. Masterson also introduced and set Laura Prepon up with her now ex-husband Ben Foster, and there is a lot to unpack about Masterson, Laura, and Ben Foster and their relationship, so we'll cover that a little bit later when we discuss Laura and Ben Foster's relationship and divorce. While Danny Masterson was the group's leader and all of the cast were close to each other, except for Topher Grace, who did not get on with Danny Masterson and because of that was isolated from a lot of the rest of the cast. But when the show was on the air, many people said that it was Topher that was the issue and it was all about Topher wanting to be the star. But today it's understood that it was actually Danny Masterson that was awful and Topher just didn't want to be around someone like that. And over the seasons of the show, Masterson is alleged to have treated Topher very poorly. The only person that really seemed to be close to Topher Grace was Laura Prepon. The rest of the cast really followed Masterson's lead and just treated him poorly or ignored him completely. Laura and Topher have always seemed to have a good relationship, and due to their characters dating in the show, Laura's character Donna was literally the girl next door for Topher's character Eric. They spent a lot of time filming together, and a lot of their scenes were just those two characters. And of course, like the dozens of crew members, but it seemed Laura was the closest out of the cast members to Topher. But outside of the set, Laura was very intertwined with the Masterson family, because not only did she date Chris Masterson for all of the seasons of That 70s Show and a few years after, and she was close to Danny Masterson, she also ended up becoming a Scientologist after the Masterson family introduced her to the church, and Chris Masterson put a bit of pressure on her to join. The Mastersons are lifelong Scientologists, and as both Danny and Chris Masterson were celebrities on two of Fox's biggest shows, they had a lot of pull in the Scientology church. It is well known that Scientology holds its celebrity members in very high regard and that they're treated much differently than other members of Scientology. The founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, always stressed how it would be a powerful recruiting tool to have Hollywood celebrities as members. And so the organization is known to actively pursue celebrities to join, and they also put pressure on the current celebrity members to try and bring in new celebrity Scientologists. Leah Remini has even spoken about meetings held by Tom Cruise where he chastised all of the celebrity Scientologists for not bringing in bigger and better Scientology celebrities. Because Scientology uses celebrities as a marketing tool, the only thing they like more than a celebrity Scientologist is a celebrity Scientology couple. And it was reported many times over the years that there was a lot of pressure on both Laura and Chris from the church and from Danny Masterson for Chris to propose to Laura and for them to get married and become one of the faces of celebrity Scientology couples. By the later seasons of that 70s show, Laura and Chris were living together, buying a house in Los Feliz, and it was widely reported that the couple were very active in the church and attended a lot of classes and auditing together. They never wanted to talk about their relationship publicly or in interviews. They didn't even walk the red carpet together. And a lot of people back then especially didn't know that they were dating. Usually the only events that they would attend together were Scientology events. As I mentioned, there was a lot of pressure from Scientology and Danny Masterson in particular for Chris to propose to Laura, but also towards the end of that 70s show, because the show was coming to an end, there was a lot of discussion about Laura Prepon replacing Erica Christensen, who was another celebrity Scientologist, as the spokesperson for Scientology's anti-drug campaigns. But allegedly Laura turned it down, partly because she didn't want to do any more public church celebrity roles. Laura and Chris attended a lot of different celebrity events throughout the year, and every single year they were both a big part of the Scientology Celebrity Center Christmas event. Every year the cast of that 70s show would all attend together and they would all appear in this pageant play thing, and it was a different sort of thing every year. Like sometimes they just did like a reading of a play, and then other times there was like a whole costumes and everything put on. But it was a huge draw, of course, to have every member of that 70s show except for Topher Grace, of course. And it was actually just after one of these Celebrity Center Christmas events where one of Danny Masterson's victims claim that they had a run-in with Laura Prepon and Laura allegedly tried to intimidate her. As I'm sure most people are aware, Danny Masterson has a string of accusations against him for being an horrendous person and assaulting women over the years. There are countless women who have made these allegations against him, and in 2023 he was actually convicted of multiple violent rapes and sentenced to over 3 decades in prison, which is where he is right now. And when the trial was happening, there was a report from Tony Ortega, who is an amazing Scientology journalist. He's been covering Scientology forever, and I'll have a lot of things that I reference about Scientology in this video linked down below in the sources. I always put all the sources down below in the Google link, and there'll be a lot of Tony Ortega's articles and a link to his website, The Underground Bunker, where he talks about all of this stuff. But when the trial was going on, he brought up this incident that happened with Laura Prepon and one of Danny Masterson's victims, and this was at a parking lot where the victim alleges that Laura tried to intimidate her out of her report about Danny Masterson, and the that she had undergone at the hands of Masterson. So this incident with Laura Prepon and one of Danny Masterson's victims happened when everything happened with Masterson back in 2003, but this wasn't actually reported that went down with Laura and the victim until 2017. And it was reported by Tony Ortega, who, as I mentioned earlier, is a Scientology journalist, and he has a site where he has been covering Scientology extensively for years called The Underground Bunker. And this incident took place at the Scientology Celebrity Center in the parking lot. One of Masterson's victims had reported the to Scientology because, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, Scientologists aren't allowed to go to the police about other Scientologists. They're meant to deal with it in Scientology. And if they do go to the police, they can be thrown out of Scientology and their family has to disconnect from them and everything like that. So they completely lose their lives, especially Masterson's victims who had been raised in Scientology. And after reporting Masterson, Scientology ended up punishing the victim, and they were required to pay $15,000 to go and have all of these extra Scientology classes and all of this auditing and training. And so she would have to go to these classes every single day. And just after Christmas, when she was leaving one of the classes, she was walking through the parking lot and Laura Prepon was in her BMW waiting, and she ended up getting out of the car and approaching the victim and asking her why she was in the celebrity center and what she was doing there. And people might hear that and think, oh, maybe she was waiting in her car and just happened to see this person that she knew. But the victim very much thinks that Laura was sent to approach her about this. And a lot of other ex-Scientologists that I know think this is the case because Laura Prepon is a celebrity in Scientology, and celebrities are very, very much higher than anybody else in the organization. And Scientologists are, in my experience, that, you know, that meme where the dog is sitting in its house and like everything's on fire and it's like, this is fine. It's that, or it's just everything is perfect while literally chaos is happening. They never really want to acknowledge anything. And even if something horrendous is happening, they just will pretend we're good, we're good. And so they very much do not usually have this like direct approach about things. And the victim also knew Laura Prepon. So when she was telling this to Tony Ortega, and Tony Ortega had another source that was talking about this too, they were saying, we know Laura, this isn't the sort of thing that she would do. This isn't the sort of questions that she would ask someone that, you know, in a park, like it's just not something she would do. And that is also why they think that she was sent there. And so by asking these questions about like, what were you doing? Why were you in the celebrity center? If the victim had turned around and said, oh, I was in there for these extra classes, or, oh, I just went through a hard class, or the worst thing, I was there over the whole Danny Masterson incident, this would mean that Laura Prepon could go and report her to Scientology because she shouldn't be talking about this. She shouldn't be acknowledging this. It is something negative. She is speaking poorly to a celebrity Scientologist about another celebrity Scientologist. And so she had to be very careful about what she said to Laura. The victim ended up saying, oh, I was just super chipper and pretended to be normal, because if she had said something that even wasn't negative about Danny or the classes and Laura interpreted that way, then the victim, because she was on thin ice with Scientology already, she would have been completely kicked out of Scientology and would have to disconnect from her family and everything like that. The victim then did later go on to say that this incident in the parking lot with Laura was one of the worst bits about the whole process with Scientology, because she just felt so intimidated and it just was an awful experience, especially because then she really felt like Laura was kind of doing Masterson's dirty work. And this is just one of many, many horrendous things that Scientology and Scientologists did to these victims. This story about Laura and the victim was first reported on well over a decade after it happened by Tony Ortega. And when he released this story, it was when all of the initial accusations were coming into the mainstream about Danny Masterson. Obviously, there'd been whispers for years about him, but when this happened in 2017, he hadn't been arrested yet, and everything continued for really 3 years for Masterson. Like, his life did not change. He still was on his show at Netflix. Ashton Kutcher very much fought to keep him there, but Netflix didn't really have any intention of letting him go. And even a year after the LA District Attorney announced an investigation into the accusations against Masterson, Netflix still hadn't fired him, and they only ended up firing him because of a situation that occurred between one of their executives. And one of the Netflix executives was at a soccer match for his kid. He was talking to another parent, and the parent asked, "Why is Danny Masterson still working on his show? Why hasn't he been fired?" And the executive told the other parent, "Oh, it's because we don't believe the victim, so we don't have any intention of firing him." And the Netflix executive didn't realize that the other parent was one of Danny Masterson's victims. And so that story was reported on by Tony Ortega again, and Netflix, over the whole situation, ended up firing the executive and Masterson. And then 6 months later, the arrest of Masterson occurred, and he was charged with all of the rapes. And that is when this story by the New York Post came out, where Laura Prepon was referenced as one of his friends. And the New York Post story came out, and they ended up having a lot of the information from an ex-Scientologist called Jeff Levin. And in it, he was talking about how Masterson had this Scientology celebrity crew that went around Hollywood, and it was mainly Jason Lee, Giovanni Ribisi, and Laura Prepon. And whenever Laura Prepon's PR, and I'm assuming whole team, saw this reference in this New York Post article that was getting a lot of coverage because it happened just after the arrest, and it was the first real time that an article detailed Scientology's interventions in trying to bury all of this stuff and silence a lot of Masterson's victims. And so when this story was coming out, there ended up being a little line added to it that basically said, "Laura Prepon has stepped away from the church lately." There was no discussion about her not being a Scientologist. As far as anyone knew, in June 2020, she was still a Scientologist. It wasn't until a year later, in August 2021, that she did all those interviews where she talked about leaving Scientology 5 or 6 years ago, which a lot of people debate whether that's true or whether it might be true that she's left, but it definitely wasn't 5 or 6 years ago. And so this little line was really the only sort of acknowledgement, because Laura and her team, I'm assuming, didn't want to address it in any way because it was such a firestorm. And so when Tony Ortega, who was quoted in this New York Post article too, saw Laura and her team trying to start to distance themselves, he ended up re-releasing this story from 2017 talking about this incident with Laura and one of Masterson's victims. And from that point, Laura said nothing about Masterson or about Scientology until a year later. And even when she did say a year later she left Scientology, she never acknowledged Masterson, and it was very, very vague. Like, she just said, "Oh, I left Scientology 5 or 6 years ago." No other details were given, because what can she say? She can't deny that she's been friends with him for 2.5 decades. She was extremely close with him. They were even pictured together when all of this was happening up until his arrest. And so she can't deny it. And anything she says in acknowledgement of it is just going to blow up. I mean, we know what happened to Ashton and Mila. And so ignore has really been the sort of option that she and her team have chosen to go down. Laura and Chris Masterson broke up in 2007, and there were a lot of rumors over the next year and a half that they had split up, they would make up, they would split up, they would make up, but things were completely over by 2008. As I mentioned, even though Laura and Chris broke up, Laura remained very close friends with Danny Masterson for many, many more years, up until his arrest, at least. And she spent a lot of time with him and his wife, Bijou Phillips. They even traveled together, vacationed together, and they would even post like social media pictures together and even stuff when she got married. And Laura wasn't really someone that posted a ton about like her private life on social media. And so it is interesting, the few times she's chosen to do that, it's with Masterson. But there is more to talk about with her exit from Scientology and her friendship with Masterson, her husband and his friendship with Masterson, and her husband's divorce. But I briefly want to discuss her other most famous role first, her role as Alex Voss in Orange is the New Black. Between the end of that 70s show in 2006, when they concluded the 8th season, and the beginning of Laura's other biggest role that she's known for in 2013, she guest starred in a number of very popular shows. Most of these were single episode appearances, but there were a few where she did a little mini multi-episode arc. Laura appeared in Medium, House MD, Castle, and Are You There, Chelsea? And there was also a 3-episode appearance on How I Met Your Mother. The last show that she did before Orange is the New Black was the show on TBS, Men at Work. This was the show that Danny Masterson starred in just before he went to Netflix with Ashton Kutcher and they were on the ranch. Laura Prepon is also a very big poker player, and that might help shed some light to some of my regular viewers about where I've acquired some of the behind the scenes information for this video. She has done a number of celebrity poker tournaments, and she used to play a lot with Danny Masterson, Ashton Kutcher, and Chris Masterson, and she did also executive produce a poker celebrity series on E! Orange is the New Black came out in 2013 and was a hugely popular show. It was also a very impactful show due to the fact that it was only the 3rd show made by Netflix that was the sort of beginning of this streaming networks making their own shows, and also the beginning of the binge model. House of Cards and a show called Hemlock Grove were the first 2 shows made by Netflix in early 2013, and while House of Cards was very popular, it really wasn't until Orange is the New Black that people really got on board with streaming platforms making their own shows and the binge model. Orange is the New Black was the first massively successful show where people were getting the entire season at once. And I remember at the time that Orange came out, it was mind-blowing that we would get 13 episodes all at once. And I remember every summer, because Orange would always release in the summer, like June, early June, sometimes July. And it was just this huge thing that a lot of my friends and I would always come out on a Friday and we would always spend the weekend watching it. And a lot of the times, if I was like visiting in the UK, it would coincide with this bank holiday that only happens on the Isle of Man for the motorbike race. And so when it would line up the release with that bank holiday, it was always great. Orange was incredibly successful for its entire 7-season run, and even though the last few seasons weren't quite as critically acclaimed as the earlier ones, it still drew in huge audiences, and it really was like it couldn't fail. I remember even in the 5th season, there was a hack at Netflix where the hackers only took the first 10 episodes of Orange is the New Black season 5, and they actually put a ransom request into Netflix, which Netflix said we're not going to pay it, and they ended up releasing the 10 episodes about a month early, and I absolutely watched those episodes. I remember I was living in New Jersey at the time and I was working these like horrible overnight shifts, and that week that came out, that really got me through some overnight shifts. And Netflix ended up thinking like, oh, this might kind of hurt than the release whenever it happens, but it honestly made people anticipate more the last couple of episodes, and it didn't even hurt the numbers for the first 10 episodes. It just was more popular than ever. Netflix has said that over 105 million households have viewed at least one episode of Orange is the New Black as of 2019, and it's only higher now. The show didn't really have that much buzz outside of the lesbian community before it aired. I remember people were kind of questioning, like, why is Netflix making their own show? And people really didn't think it was going to be good. And the only sort of buzz really about it was that the creator and the head writer, Jenny Cohen, was the creator of Weeds, and that was a really well-received show, but it was a Showtime show, so it was quite small. And if you're a fan of Showtime shows, especially Dexter, Yellow Jackets, Shameless, The L Word, The L Word Generation Q, then I am going to have a video coming out in the next few weeks that is so full of behind the scenes information that isn't known that I'm actually like a tiny bit scared to release it, because I think there's some stuff in it that people are going to be really shocked by. And this is why this is a bit of a shorter video, because just wait until this one comes out. So just to build a little bit of anticipation, put a pin in that. But I even remember at the time there were people saying, like, why is Laura Prepon doing this silly Netflix show? And there were other people that had name recognition in the cast that first season, but a lot of them, they hadn't really done big projects at that time, or were doing big projects at that time. And then people like Taylor Schilling, who were just starting to come up. She had just done that movie, The Lucky Ones, with Zac Efron, but that only came out the same year as Orange. So it very much was pitched, and most people knew it as that Netflix show that Laura Prepon is doing. There was buzz in the lesbian community, though, because obviously people like Natasha Lyonne and Laura Prepon do have a lot of fans in the lesbian community. And then Jodie Foster was also directing some episodes that first season. As most people are probably aware, the show is based on a book about a true story by a woman named Piper Kerman. And the sort of premise of the show is what happened to Piper Kerman and what is detailed in her book, that she ended up going to prison about a decade after she committed a crime, which was carrying drug money for her ex-girlfriend, who was a heroin smuggler. The show was an immediate success when they released all 13 episodes of the first season in June 2013, but over the summer it just got bigger and bigger. Netflix started to promote it more and capitalize on the really positive reviews from critics and audiences, and positive word of mouth started to spread, and people really got excited about this binge model. And with the show being the biggest thing that everyone was talking about in the summer, and Laura being such a big part of the show, people were really excited to see what was going to happen with Laura's character, Alex Voss, in the second season. However, Laura made a very strange decision and ended up not renewing her series regular contract for a second season. She ended up only appearing in 4 episodes of the 13 episodes in season 2, and people were really confused by this decision. Usually with contracts for TV shows nowadays, whenever cast are being signed up during a first season, it's not unusual that they are signed for multi-season deals. A lot of shows, especially like CW shows, they will sign them for 5, 6, 7 seasons, because most networks want shows to run for 5 seasons, because that is usually the barrier for syndication. It usually needs to be 100 episodes. Although nowadays that's kind of different, because it is quite rare to have a show that is 20, 22, 24 episode seasons that runs year after year and is produced year after year. Most of the time now, the really successful shows are getting a season every 2 years, and they're 8, 10, or 12 episodes. With Netflix, repeats and residuals and syndication wasn't really that much of a factor, because it was a streaming show. It was this new type of TV. And so they hadn't really thought out how to do this season to season stuff. They hadn't really banked on the show being a success. And it's also why the actors, writers, and directors didn't get the greatest deal, because this really was the beginning of kind of a new industry. And it is really why things like the strike from last year, both the actors and writers strike, is happening today, because when these deals were set up at the beginning, they just weren't done in a favorable way to the actual people making the show. They were done in favor of the streaming networks. And it was done in the same kind of model that reality TV is done, kids TV, news, all of that stuff is done, because those type of shows don't actually pay residuals. It's why reality TV is everywhere today, also because it's super cheap to make, but they don't have to pay the cast, writers, directors, no one for any of the reruns. They just pay usually a very small per episode fee to these reality stars, and then that's it. And if they air an episode of 90 Day Fiancé 100 times, they make all of the profit on 99 of them. The cast of Orange is the New Black have spoken about how poorly they were paid, especially actors who were unknown in the beginning of the show or joined the show down the road as unknown actors. Danielle Brooks, who played Tasty in the entire run of the show, she's spoken about how in the first season, she was making about $1,000 an episode. And with no residuals, that's a bad deal for any show, but especially a show that went on to be as popular as Orange is the New Black. I have seen several residual checks from cast members of Orange is the New Black, and I also believe some of them have released these on social media. The one that immediately comes to mind is Brooke, who played Poussey's girlfriend in the show, and the residual checks aren't just like normal bad residual checks. They are making cents on these episodes whenever they're replaying. Although none of the writers, directors, and actors from Orange get great residuals, it is understood that people like Laura Prepon and Taylor Schilling did get significantly better residual deals, and they were also paid a lot more for their roles in the show. I think you can put more weight behind that claim when you consider that when they were casting Orange, they actually originally wanted Katie Holmes to play Piper, and they also were entertaining Kate Hudson playing the lead role. And they did actually get like quite far down the line with Katie Holmes, but it didn't end up working out with her because of scheduling conflicts. But can you imagine if Katie Holmes and Laura Prepon, the two 90s girls next door, were playing a couple on Orange is the New Black? I mean, probably would have been even more popular then. I wanted to provide that information about the salaries for both what we're going to discuss now about Laura's decision with season 2, as a lot of people claim it was financially motivated, and there's also some context for later when we discuss her divorce and her current income in 2025. But whenever she made this decision about season 2, it is understood that it wasn't financially motivated. And the kind of PR line at the time was that she ended up not being in season 2 that much because of scheduling conflicts. But that's what they always say. And there is no scheduling conflicts because there was none. There's nothing that she was doing at that time project-wise, unless it was something else. But there has been a pretty widely reported story, and this has been spoken about by a lot of people close to the show, that her motivation for stepping back in season 2 wasn't something that was really her idea at all. One thing that's been widely reported about Laura Prepon throughout her career is the fact that she has a lot of the time let boyfriends and partners make bad business decisions for her. She had broken up with Chris Masterson by the time Orange came around, but as I said, she was still friends with Danny Masterson, who was very influential in her life, and she was still a Scientologist, and she was also dating someone called Scott Michael Foster, and he's no relation to her ex-husband Ben Foster. And these people were not fans of Laura being in Orange. This includes all of Scientology, because as a lot of ex-Scientologists will tell you, and just what is known about Scientology in general, is that they are not really fans of the LGBT community. In between Orange wrapping its first season and the renewal coming through for the second season, Laura started dating Scott Foster. And when Orange started to become extremely popular and successful, then Scientology really allegedly wasn't a fan of Laura being in such a big LGBT show and playing a lesbian on TV. Neither was Danny Masterson and neither was Scott Foster. So Laura was allegedly pressured into taking a step back from the show. She decided not to renew her series regular contract for season 2, and as I said, she only appeared in 4 episodes. I remember even being like super annoyed at the time because I have always liked her, and again, this is like 2013 before all this other stuff came out. And I also like really liked her character. Her character was probably my favorite character on the show. And there was so many people that were like, why would you take this chance on this Netflix binge show, and then when it becomes crazy successful the next season take a step back? Thankfully, between season 2 and 3 of Orange, she actually broke up with her boyfriend at the time, Scott Foster. And according to her, this is also when she left Scientology. Some interesting stories about Laura and Scientology and Orange did circulate when she was doing these 4 episodes for season 2, as the cast of Orange all shot in upstate New York and they spent a lot of time together. They were all pretty friendly. That apparently did drop off in later seasons and people weren't as close then, and there started to be some rivalries and issues. But in the earlier seasons, they were said to be really close and good friends. And because they were kind of isolated, they spent a lot of time together. A lot of people close to the show have spoken about Laura Prepon's relationships with her Orange co-stars being pretty instrumental in helping her break away from Scientology. I don't know this next bit for a fact. It has been reported by a lot of people and just spoken about, and as always, the sources are down below. But allegedly, when season 2 was being shot and Laura was going up for like an episode, then there was a break, going up for another episode, she had a Scientology handler that would travel with her. And that is far from unheard of with Scientology, because they will do anything to keep celebrity members. And when it's people like Tom Cruise and the bigger celebrities, they will go way far beyond that. I actually had a really lovely subscriber reach out to provide some information about a show that they worked on for a number of years. And when I was speaking to them, we spoke a little bit about Scientology, because I obviously did that video about the celebrities of Scientology. And in that video, I talk about the War of the Worlds set and how Steven Spielberg agreed to put this Scientology tent on the set for Tom Cruise and have all these Scientology representatives. And this subscriber ended up telling me that the show that they worked on was shooting on the same lot as War of the Worlds. And she was saying that there was like massages, and Tom Cruise had this super fancy barista, and you could go and like get a free massage or get a free coffee, but you had to listen to this like little Scientology spiel for a few minutes. So I can't imagine the amount of money that that was costing to have going all the time throughout the production of this entire movie. But that's why I don't think it is too far-fetched to think that Laura Prepon had a handler because she was one of the bigger celebrities, especially when Orange was big, and it hadn't been that many years since that 70s show, and especially with her relationship with Danny Masterson, whose family is very high up, and all of them being also big stars on TV, he had a lot of sway within Scientology. Usually someone like Laura, who was on 2 big shows that ran for 7 and 8 seasons, you would think that she would pretty much be set for life with residuals. Someone like Leah Remini, who was on 1 successful show for a long period of time, she has spoken a lot in interviews, and so have countless other celebrities. It's just the first one that comes to mind because we're talking about Scientology, about how that used to be all you needed in the 90s and early 2000s. If you had one really good hit show, you could pretty much live off the residuals for the rest of your life with, you know, a project here and there, and with the big lump sums you got year after year on the show originally. But with Laura Prepon, because Orange had this unique situation I just described, and because when that 70s show was going to be sold to Netflix or any other streaming app for a lot of money, but Netflix was the one it came down to, this was whenever they were looking at starting the revival, that 90s show or reboot or continuation, whatever you want to call it. And whenever they were in these discussions, everything happened with Danny Masterson. That was why I was mentioning about the ranch and the Netflix executive, because it just became untouchable for Netflix because people were so, justifiably so, angry about the situation with him and the ranch and everything that happened with that executive. So Netflix decided to pass on that 70s show. And although there are places like Peacock that you can stream it, and it does rerun on TBS and things like that, it just is not anywhere close to the level of other shows of a similar success level. The show is airing fewer and fewer reruns, and they just don't have that big streaming platform that has all of the past seasons, and they didn't get that big deal. Another show like The Office and Friends, whenever they sell to these networks, they end up getting this huge multi-million-dollar payout for the actors and directors and writers, and then they do get, you know, a check every year for the residuals or whatever the way the deal is done. Like the Friends cast, which obviously is a complete outlier and one of the most successful shows of all time, they still make something like $25 million a year because, of course, it's not just the US. These shows are airing everywhere, and I don't even know where you can watch that 70s show in the UK anymore, and I think it's the same in Europe, but there are a few places that have like smaller networks that pick it up, and like I said, Peacock, but it's not anywhere comparable to the deals that shows like The Office and Friends have, and that ended up losing the That 70s Show regulars like Masterson, Kutcher, all of them. It ended up losing them millions because of this whole Danny Masterson situation. And I say all that because it was made abundantly clear in Laura's divorce documents that she really had taken a massive hit because of the That 70s Show situation and because of the way that the Orange deal was put together. But before we talk about the divorce and the divorce documents, let's first talk about the marriage. Laura was introduced to her now ex-husband Ben Foster by Danny Masterson, and Danny Masterson and Ben Foster have been best friends for decades. Ben Foster was really close to him, that in the days when Masterson and Kutcher and Valderrama, and a lot of the time too Diddy, used to go out and party, Ben Foster was frequently with them and spent a lot of time just going out with them, and they've continued to be close over the years too.
And you and Ben Foster?
We all started hanging out in 1998.
Oh my
Every
God.
Friday after our taping, all of our friends would come hang out and whatever, and he was there.
Okay.
She cut a bit of her sentence off there, because what it should have been is we all used to hang out 20 years ago every Friday night after the taping of our show at the Scientology Celebrity Center. Outside of Kutcher and Valderrama, Masterson only usually hangs around with Scientologists. Scientologists, mostly celebrity Scientologists, but according to Ben Foster, he is not a Scientologist, although there has been a lot of other people that have claimed that he is. Everything that I'm going to say about Ben Foster and Scientology is alleged, but it does come from multiple different people and sources over the years, and it is a lot of people speaking anonymously. So I just want to be clear that there isn't black and white information on this, but there is the constant repeated claims that we're going to be going over. Prior to dating Laura, Ben Foster was dating Robin Wright, and they dated, got engaged, broke up, and then got back together, dated, got engaged again, and broke up again. A lot of the people and sources that have claimed that Ben Foster is a Scientologist have also spoken about Ben Foster and Robin Wright's relationship and their breakups, both of them, being the result of interference of Scientology, as allegedly Scientology very much did not like Robin Wright and her relationship with Foster. It's also been claimed by multiple people that Masterson pressured Ben Foster to split with Robin Wright and in return would put in a good word with Laura Prepon. One of the only people who knew about the engagement before it went mainstream was Danny Masterson, and he posted about it on his Instagram. And when Ashton Kutcher saw this post, he confronted Laura about it in obviously like a friend, casual way.
It's not just a random engagement, it's an engagement to another friend of mine.
And he ended up saying,
The amount of crap that you gave Mila and I
know,
like,
dude.
oh, yeah, 20 years, friends. And you and Ben Foster? We've
know,
known
dude.
each other all together just as long.
So Laura and Ben dated, got engaged, got married, and this all happened extremely quickly, which is why I'm assuming people like Ashton Kutcher were very surprised and didn't even really know they were dating. Ben Foster split with Robin Wright in 2015, and in July 2016, he and Laura started dating. They were together for 3 months, and then in October 2016, they got engaged. The next year in 2017, they had their first child. And then the year after in 2018, they got married. And 2 years after that, they had their second child in 2020. The following year in 2021 is when Laura does all those interviews and says that she has left Scientology and that Ben Foster isn't a Scientologist. So by 2021, 2022, Laura had 2 young kids and she isn't working a lot. She ends up writing a book about parenting, but she's mainly focusing on a new venture, which is cooking and her YouTube and Instagram videos. And if you've watched any interviews with Laura Prepon over the last decade, maybe longer, you'll know she is obsessed with bone broth. It is the key factor in a lot of her cooking. And believe me, I have watched too many interviews to make this video and all the other That 70s Show stuff that I've covered. And I ended up watching 10 interviews in a row where she mentioned bone broth in every single interview. This was during especially the orange time period. She is obsessed with bone broth. So she starts a company called Prepon, which is a good name considering she's a celebrity and it fits in. Prepon is her main bread and butter, what she's been doing over the last several years, although she was involved in the terrible That 70s Show reboot revival. She appeared in a few episodes and she also directed a few episodes. There was a second season released recently of the show, but it has now been cancelled by Netflix. So in regards to her Prepon company and her cooking videos, she seems to have the most success on Instagram. She has over 11 million followers, which obviously is huge numbers. And also in comparison to like other people on That 70s Show, like Ashton Kutcher has 5 million, and other people on Orange, most of them have like 1 to 2 million. I definitely think a lot of her success on Instagram is because of the two audiences. And mainly, I honestly would say more from Orange than That 70s Show, because That 70s Show, it was in the 90s and early 2000s before social media, and really like a lot of Laura's posts that get the best engagement really are when she posts with other people from Orange is the New Black, even like very recently. Her engagement on Instagram isn't really great at all. It's between 0.08% and 0.34%. And you want a minimum of 1% to have any sort of success. A brand or anything that's going to want to post or be affiliated is going to want a minimum of 1%. And the other factor is it seems to be really falling off, as the past month she's lost over 20,000 followers. Hi guys, Editing Ash just jumping in to say that it is a lot more extensive, the dropped followers and subscribers, because you guys know I'm always continuing like researching up until I basically released the video, and that's why we've always have these little jumping in moments. But the thing with the Instagram followers, the last couple of months it was 20,000, but I think because while I've been making this video, like more articles have been coming out about the divorce and like what was cited in there, and there is probably about 100,000 subscribers, followers, sorry, on Instagram that she's losing every 6 months or so. And really, if you look back to when the whole allegations started coming out about Danny Masterson, and then all those articles were coming out about them still being friends and everything like that, there is this steady decline. And then you see these moments in time, like the Ash and Amila stuff and the divorce and things like that. And you just see these big drop-offs. But I'm going to cut myself off there because, as I say a million times, I could talk about YouTube and social media stuff all day. So back to past me. Her YouTube is not as successful as her Instagram, and obviously there's a lot more money in YouTube. She has about the same amount of subscribers as I do, but her views are horrendous for a channel that has 250,000 subscribers. Her last couple of videos, most of them haven't even broken 5K. And that is especially horrendous. I mean, it's bad for a channel with 250,000, but it's especially bad when the channel is run by a famous celebrity that has two enormous beloved shows that they were a part of with huge numbers in their audiences. One glance at the channel and it's very clear to me what's happening over there. It's the typical Hollywood does YouTube, and I think Jennifer Beals and Eileen Chaikin are making the same mistake right now with what they're doing, because a lot of Hollywood people don't respect YouTube or think that it requires any sort of skill or talent. They see there's a lot of money and they think, oh, that's easy. I'm just going to film myself like those YouTubers, but I can afford a fancy camera and a really nice set, and I can get a producer. And so I'm going to be able to produce this higher quality with all of the fancy bells and whistles, but not thinking about the actual substance quality of what they're putting out. And so they think, oh, I can throw a video up of just filming random stuff about myself and it can be this great camera quality, and I'm going to do way better than these YouTubers filming in their rooms. But unfortunately, YouTube is very different, and people care very little about things like camera quality and sets. Yes, like your audio needs to be perfect and stuff like that. Like it needs to look okay, but people care way more about the actual substance of the video, the storytelling and all of that, rather than just, oh, this looks amazing. The really sad thing is though, if Laura got someone who knew YouTube and knew what they were doing, she could easily make a killing on YouTube, because she already has such a leg up being so recognizable and being a celebrity, but she needs to move away from trying to use like a typical Hollywood producer and making things in a Hollywood type way, because it is different. It is YouTube. And she would, if she could get even a YouTube consultant or even someone who's done YouTube themselves, there's everywhere in LA, I'm sure she would have so much more success than she's having now. Because right now, in my opinion, as someone who does YouTube as their job, there's no way that she's making more than $500 or $600, and she has the expenditure of a producer, editor, all of these places that she shoots, all of the other team members involved, and as I said, I think that she'd do far better going to people that have YouTube experience and YouTube knowledge rather than trying to go down the expensive Hollywood route. In the documents produced for her divorce, there was a breakdown of her monthly income and Ben Foster's too. Ben Foster is quoted as making around $70,000 a month, and Laura is quoted as making about $22,000 a month. And those figures are both gross. And this is going to sound insane, but in terms of a famous Hollywood celebrity who has 2 enormous shows that lasted 8 and 7 seasons, that is incredibly low. And I know, believe me, it's a fuckload of money, but that I was really surprised when I saw that. And I mean, when I think about it, like all the stuff that I talked about earlier, that's why I was talking about that. Because of the situations with that 70 show in Orange, it does make sense, but I was still surprised it was that low. And again, it's an astronomical fuckload of money, but for Hollywood, especially when you take out a manager 10%, lawyers, agents, if you go to an event or a red carpet and you need to pay for your own glam, that takes a lot of money out of that gross. And it really, especially for their lifestyle, it doesn't leave a lot for a Hollywood celebrity again. One thing maybe that's not being counted though is the fact that she has a company. So she could be putting a lot of her income going into that company, like what money she does make on Instagram and YouTube, that could be going into the company. And because she is earning $22K through residuals or other projects that she's done, maybe the money going into the company, she's just leaving it in there and she's not paying herself or taking a drawing out of that company. And so on paper, yes, she's only making 22K, but she or the company is really earning a lot more. Although I would think that they would cover all of that stuff in court and lawyers would look into all of that stuff. So it could be that, but I would think that they would at least go over like a year of finances or maybe even 2 to get an average of what's coming in, especially because both of their paychecks are so dependent on residuals and things, because Ben Foster, he's making most of his residuals from things like X-Men and Get On It and Alpha Dog and movies like that. There was a lot of other stuff that came out in the divorce documents. Laura Prepon claimed that Ben Foster was a longtime alcoholic and that he was worrying her if he had their kids. So she put a lot of stipulations on him about not drinking 12 hours before he has the kids and not drinking while he has them. She also talked about when their first child was born that he got so intoxicated, she found him outside their New York apartment sleeping in his underwear. After Laura accused him of all of these problems with alcohol, Ben Foster accused Laura of, quote, inappropriate marital conduct. And the document went on to say that Ben claimed that Laura had been guilty of such cruel and inhumane treatment or conduct which rendered further cohabitation unsafe and improper. Foster also asked the court to enforce the prenuptial agreement that he and Laura signed when they got married on May 21st, 2018, and also asked that they determine a custody schedule and an amount for Foster to pay Laura for child support. They did have this prenup, so it was a lot easier and they followed it pretty much to the letter. They agreed to sell their Nashville estate and they were listing the home for $4.5 million, and they'll both continue to pay like the mortgage and taxes and insurance until the close of the sale. And then after the mortgage and payments and everything is taken out, the net proceeds from the sale will end up paying Laura $977,000. And any proceeds, if there is any, because if they're paying off the mortgage and stuff, any of the proceeds would be equally split between Foster and Prepon. The last remaining thing was that Foster agreed to pay Prepon $5,500 a month in child support and that she would be the primary parent. Their divorce was finalized just a few weeks ago in April 2025. The year before Foster filed for divorce, there were a lot of rumors that while their marriage had been rocky for quite a while, the trial and sentencing of Danny Masterson and their differing opinions on it put more pressure on their relationship, as there were multiple reports that Ben Foster was standing by Danny Masterson's side. Of course, he didn't write a letter, many people didn't, but that might be more linked to him not wanting to damage his own career. Laura Prepon has never commented about Masterson's trial or sentencing or anything to do with him, and she had a close relationship with him after the investigation was made public. But after he was officially arrested and charged, that is when she began distancing herself from Masterson and from Scientology. Many people believe that Laura Prepon made this statement about not practicing Scientology anymore in order to not have to address her relationship with Danny Masterson. There are many things that people are curious about, like the fact that she announced that she had distanced herself from the church just as Danny Masterson was arrested and going on trial, and it just so happened that she had actually distanced herself 5 to 6 years ago, and she really isn't usually one to issue statements like this because she's a very private person normally, and she only said she stepped back from the church again, right as things were gearing up for Masterson's trial. Many people, including Leah Remini, have spoke about their unhappiness with Laura and have called on her to further address her exit. Due to the many years that Laura spent promoting and highlighting Scientology, Leah Remini and many others think that it's only right that Laura speaks truthfully about her exit from the controversial group. I've said this a lot about Hollywood's serial predators, that I find it really hard to believe that nobody heard anything. I think that it's totally possible for us regular people to have monsters in our life that we are unaware of. But when it comes to celebrities, it's a different story. They have so many people aware of who they are. It's so much harder to hide things. They have people doing everything for them around them all the time. And I find it extra hard to believe that someone like Danny Masterson, who those rumors have existed for nearly 3 decades, and regular people are hearing them for years and years, and yet those people closest to him that are friends with him for decades hear absolutely nothing. I do find that hard to believe, but we also can't take it as fact that these people did know. It's possible they didn't. So I'll leave it up to you to decide how you feel about it. And if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you did, leave MVP below so I can thank you. As I said, I'm working on some really interesting videos, and I'm only a little bit scared about the information in them. That is why this one was a bit of a shorter one, but all of my social media, Patreon, G social media, sources, everything is in the description box and the pinned comment. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!